Hey, welcome to Bucket Talks, where we have casual conversations about life and business, just like I used to have with my dad sitting on a bucket in the barn. So grab a bucket and join us. I haven't taught school for more than 25 years now, but the topic of teaching school comes up very nearly every day in my life. It was one of those experiences I will never forget. Spent 8 years in the classroom. I wouldn't have traded those 8 years for anything else. But every time I would have a class of graduating seniors, I had a special message just for them. Today, I want to share the 4 points of that special message with you. Beware of perpetuating the myth. That was point number 1. Number 2, don't just listen, learn. Don't just hear the beat, feel it. Most of all, never let the spoon feed you. And those were the 4 things I would tell my students as they would get ready to graduate. I was about to send them off into the world. They were going to take on a role as an adult. Many of them had almost reached 18 years of age, and they were going to go out into the world and become productive adults. I wanted them to recognize that there's 4 things they need to be really, really careful of, regardless of whether they went to college, went to vocational school, or went off to practice a vocation. I wanted them to be aware that there were 4 things they had to make sure that they didn't do or that they didn't miss. And the first one was to beware of perpetuating the myth. Just because something has been portrayed as being true doesn't necessarily make it true. Just because somebody said something doesn't make it true. Just because a story got repeated often doesn't mean that the story is true and accurate. Just because you learn something in an institution of higher learning doesn't mean that it was correct. Do your thinking. Don't be guilty of perpetuating the myth. Don't be the person who will pick up a story without ever validating it and repeat it, and you begin to perpetuate the myth. Stop letting other people dictate how you think. Learn to think for yourself. Number 2, don't just listen, but learn. It's not enough just to take in information. It's not enough just to sit and be a passive listener. I have to actively engage in the process of learning. Had a whole nother speech that I would give them entitled, Don't Be a Student, Be a Seeker. I'm not going to get into that in this podcast, but I will talk about that at another point. Don't just listen, learn. It's not enough just to hear something. You have to make sure that what you heard, if it has value to you, you take into the core of your being, that it moves you to where you want to go. Don't just listen, but learn. Too often times we get caught up into things where we've been guilty of listening. We heard, but we didn't learn. We took in the information, but we failed to process it to the next step. We failed to examine it at the proper depth. Don't just listen, learn. Extremely important lesson for students as they got ready to go out into the world. Extremely important lesson for you and me as we wake up every day and we live in a world that's filled and bombarded with all kinds of information, all kinds of stuff. Let's don't just listen, but let's instead take that to the next level and let's learn something. Let's learn from the things that we hear. Whether they're true or false, let's learn something from it. Whatever that information is that we hear, let's take that and process it and learn something from it. Are you being manipulated? Are you being sold? Whatever it is, don't just listen, but instead learn. Number 3, don't just hear the beat, feel it. There's a difference between hearing the beat and feeling it. When you hear the beat, it enters into your ears and you hear the beat. But instead of hearing it, we need to feel it. What we see and hear and the things that we listen to and the stuff that comes into our world, we need to let it hit us at a different point. the great speech given by Jimmy Valvano at the ESPYs. He said there's 3 things that you should do every day. Every day you should do these 3 things, and if you do them, you'll have an amazing life. Number 1, you should let your emotions move you to tears. What he was saying is don't just hear the beat, but feel it. You should think, and think deeply. Number 2. Don't just hear the beat, but feel it. And number 3, he said, you should laugh. Laugh. Let that go into the core of your being and just laugh. And if you do those 3 things every day, you'll have an amazing life. I would send my students into the world not just to hear the beat, but to feel it. Do some things that will not just listen, but learn. Not perpetuate the myth, but get to the core of what it was all about. And then number 4 was kind of needs a little explanation. And it was, most of all, never let the spoon feed you. That was something my dad used to tell me occasionally. Don't let the spoon feed you. In other words, don't just take what's on the spoon and eat it. Don't just eat what's put in front of you, but instead make sure that it's worth eating. Make sure that it has value. Don't let the spoon feed you. Just because you had a required course in college doesn't mean that everything that was taught in that course is accurate and right and true and going to be in your best interest. Don't let the spoon feed you. 4 things I taught my students as they got ready to go out into the world. Beware of perpetuating a myth. Don't just repeat things that you thought were true and continue to make that myth out into the world. Number 2, don't just listen but learn. Not enough just to hear something. I heard what you said, or I learned from what you said. Big difference between the 2. Number 3, don't just hear the beat but feel it. In other words, let it move you. Let the things that you take in, the things that you hear, let them move you to a special place. And number 4, and most of all, never let the spoon feed you. Don't just eat what's put in front of you. Instead, check it out. Make sure that it's going to have value and nutrition and benefit to you. 4 things taught my students as they got ready to go out into the world. A couple of years ago, one of my former students from 25 plus years ago posted on Facebook that those were wise words from a teacher that he had written down from the class he took from me in high school, and he still had them 25 years later. Beware of the perpetuation of the myth. Don't just listen, learn. Don't just hear the beat, feel it. Most of all, never let the spoon feed you.
I've been in the darkness for 40 days. I've been searching for holy flames, a sign to light up the way. So can you help me out? Can you help me out? I've been more certain of truth before. I've been called a righteous man before. Yeah, I've been closer to Jesus before. So can you help me out? Oh, can you help me